Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to today's episode on moving beyond imposter syndrome, a reminder that our podcast is not medical advice.
The intention of today's episode is to talk about imposter syndrome and to remind you that everyone doing new things and stretching themselves has imposter syndrome. When you feel like an imposter, it doesn't mean something's wrong with you or that you are an imposter. It's likely merely an old habit. We hope you will discover in this episode that you don't have to convince yourself that you are enough to move beyond imposter syndrome. There are lots of other softer and potentially more accessible strategies to help you move beyond it, around it, and strengthen your confidence and belief in yourself.
Takeaways include that reaching out, connecting, and asking for support is key to help you move through this.
So the origin of this podcast is a conversation, and I'll actually say it was a text conversation that you and I had about 2 months ago when I was in Utah preparing to give 2 talks at a in-person conference. And I found myself at the end of a family vacation having trouble transitioning from family vacation back into someone who was about to go give a talk at a conference that I had never been to with an audience that I didn't know. And I hadn't given an in-person talk in a while. I do a lot of Zoom talks, but not in person. And the talks that I was going to give at that conference were also new for me, not something I had spoken on or shared before. And in my mind, they were outside the box topics that were maybe a little bit renegade. And I was worried how they might be received in a more traditional venue. And so I was feeling uncertain, anxious, like an imposter. And I would like to point out that even with all the coaching that I've had and coaching that I do and understanding of imposter syndrome, it's normal to have imposter syndrome when you're stretching and doing something that's new and different or perhaps unfamiliar. And I also felt like I wasn't prepared, which was clearly a story that I was telling myself since I had written the talks and applied to give the talks and all of those things. But I think our brain often tells us things and tells us stories when we feel anxious and nervous and uncertain. So in that moment, I did what I often do when I feel that way, which is text you. And we had this text conversation in which so many of the things you said were so helpful that I decided to save them for later with the intention of doing a podcast and also with the intention of having them there. So the next time I had imposter syndrome, I could scroll through them and figure out what was the thing that was going to help me move beyond it this time. I also felt that there are many bits of sort of coaching tenets and mindfulness that come into moving beyond imposter syndrome, and that sharing these things would be really helpful. And a final reflection before we jump in is that it's always harder when it's you. And so we often judge ourselves, well, I should have moved beyond it. But when it's you and it's your brain and you're in the unfamiliar situation, it's not a failing or a less than, it's just literally human. We all need help and support along the way. And as we like to say here, getting help helps. So the first tip that I wanted to share here, and the key thing to help you move beyond imposter syndrome, is literally to reach out and connect and ask for support. And so I wanted to invite you, Ni-Cheng, to reflect on what happened that day and what you asked me and told me.
I actually don't remember in vivid detail. So I'm really, really grateful that you took notes. And it is a text stream conversation, so we can just scroll back and see. But the first thing I asked you was, how are you the perfect person to give this talk in the most perfect way? And so I wanted to expand upon that. And we're going to delve a little bit more into this as well. But what objective qualities and credentials do you already possess in that particular moment that would already benefit the audience members? So, not changing or striving for any new skill acquisitions or new traits, but simply just as you are already, right here, right now. So, really, this is an opportunity for you to be mindful with your authentic self in this particular moment. Also, the fact that this opportunity was offered to you. So, there was a reason that the conference organizers saw in you that there was the potential, very high potential, I might add, that you could help their audience.
I love that. And the other thing that comes to mind with your question now, seeing it from afar, is that you said I was the perfect person. And how could I give in the most perfect way? And I didn't see that as perfectionism. And I just want to make sure our listeners don't see it as you don't have to be perfect in any way. What that means is you're the right fit person and that you have a lot to offer. And so if that word perfect is edgy for some recovering perfectionists, I think it's the authentic piece that you mentioned, being yourself. And why are you the right person? And what do you have to offer? So the second thing I wanted to bring up that you offered me was the opportunity to borrow someone else's belief in you. And that question, how are you the perfect person to give this talk, this perfect talk to this audience, was so clear that you believed in me and you believed that I was that person to give that talk. And I often share with clients about borrowing someone else's belief. And I think as parents too, we can believe in our children and they can borrow our belief. And so sometimes when we don't have the belief, it is so helpful to just borrow someone else's temporarily.
Yeah. And I definitely thank my prior coaches, my prior sponsors and mentors and friends and family for believing in me, present company included.
Yeah, I think what we can share by believing in each other, sometimes it's so much easier for someone else to believe in you than for you to believe in you. And it's a huge gift. And so when we step out of also wondering what could go wrong, say as a parent or believing in a spouse, for example, and just let them literally have our belief and tell them that is one of the key things to help them build confidence. If you think about a baby learning to walk or a 1-year-old learning to walk, we believe in them. We just know they will learn to walk. And that, whether we realize it or not, that trust in them and belief in them is a really powerful piece of why they keep falling down and getting up. So the next tool we wanted to share was this focusing on your experience, skills, knowledge, and strengths. And you mentioned a little bit about your accomplishment, but I think sometimes we think of ourselves in isolation in that moment, and we think about where we might fall short or why we don't measure up or why perhaps someone else speaking might have more experience or some different special degree or training. And yet we can really look back and focus on what we bring and our strengths. And for me, it was the experience that I often find when I'm doing something new, I discount all the previous experience because it's new. And instead, you can bring that experience with you. It's part of you. It will always be part of you. People who are maybe thinking of switching out of medicine or actually in the podcast that was released today, the woman, Dr. Lilonic, talked about how she was a primary care doctor and she became a hospitalist and she thought it was going to be all new. And instead, what she found is that she was using all of her communication skills and all of the things that she had learned as a primary care doc in her hospitalist role every day. And so this idea that we can bring our strengths and our experience and our wisdom with us is a really powerful thought.
So I texted about asking you to think about the objective facts about your experience. Our brain likes facts as evidence. So thinking about the hundreds that you have already helped with your coaching and through your experience in well-being leadership, thousands through our podcasts, the decades of experience as a pediatrician as well, what have you already acquired as a skill set? And also, what have you done with that skill set in terms of helping others?
And I just want to interject here that when you say all that, I think for me, it's hard to hear like, oh, I've helped hundreds, or, oh, our podcast has reached thousands. Like we know that for many of us who are high achievers, we often deflect the compliments and we deflect our achievements. And so in coaching, we call it the capacity to have. And so for me, it takes a pause and a breath and just allowing that softness, that it's okay to allow that, and it's okay for that to be you. And so if you struggle with that, I just wanted to offer that even now when I hear you say that, you get this little tightness of like, and a little anxiety. And so it's very normal and it takes practice. And now I know what it is immediately. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to practice. A little bit of a similar example is I had a friend one day who was complimenting me on my kids and how I had done such a good job raising them. And I immediately said like, no, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. She was like, wait a minute, why would you deflect that? And why would you say, oh, they're not that fabulous? Because I know you think they're fabulous. And so it's really just like a very ingrained natural tendency. And so ever since that day, when she said that, I have noticed that I tend to immediately like withdraw. And I just have to practice opening up and accepting and letting it in. So if anyone else feels that way, it takes practice. And when you have imposter syndrome is the perfect time to practice.
It's a moment of mindfulness that can be incorporated to allow the compliment to sink in, to allow the acceptance of that compliment. So on this podcast, we talk a lot about negative attention bias, where we focus on the negative because that's how our brains were set up. Evolutionarily, there was an advantage to focusing on the negative, but the brain focusing on the negative is a somewhat archaic way to protect us. We don't need all of that negative attention bias in the 21st century. So we know about neuroplasticity and how we can actually change our brains for the better. So we can actually retrain our brain to be more helpful and objectively name and list the positives. So our brains have a harder time arguing with facts. So getting more granular, I asked you to think about all of the experiences in everything that we just mentioned. And basically all of those credentials all had already happened. And those facts can hopefully provide the evidence to help you learn to believe.
And one fact I just thought would be fun to share is that probably today we will have 90,000 downloads of this podcast. And yay, and it's so many. And so, as you said, you've helped thousands through the podcast. And my brain was skeptical for a moment. And then I just started to think about that number and I'm like, well, 90,000, that's 90,000. And so it's a concrete thing that you can think of. And a moment here also just to appreciate all of you 90,000 people who have listened and listened again. We are very grateful that you find this helpful and you keep coming back to listen. And we hope to continue to provide useful, inspiring content.
Yes, thank you.
So imposter syndrome also often triggers feelings of intimidation or this sense that we're not enough. And for many of us high achievers, this compare and despair or comparitis, and it's sort of a piece of it and or it triggers it. And so I wanted to reflect on this because that was actually something that came up that day, was looking at all the other speakers. And I didn't know most of them, honestly, but your brain tells you that you must not be enough, or they have some credential that you don't have. We always look to compare ourselves. We were trained to do that. And I find the adage that I am enough very difficult. And so I wanted to bring that up here because I hear a lot, oh, just practice thinking I am enough. And I have to say, I don't even know what enough is. And then there's like, you are enough or you're not enough. And for me, it's a very edgy thought. And so I tend to stay away from it. And instead, I try to think of my tendency to compare myself is a habit, a bad habit that doesn't usually work in my best interest. I also try to remind myself that there's no scarcity, there's no competition, and that this was actually something I think you mentioned, that there's no scarcity of viewpoints or stories or ways to address important issues. And this idea that we can focus on the special, unique, authentic thing that I personally bring or you personally bring to something and your individual viewpoint, and that that is going to be helpful for someone in the audience, and that if it helps one person, that's of value. So for me, I have opted out of the I am enough thought. I know a lot of people find it helpful, but for me, it's a bit triggering, and it gets my brain stuck in this sort of idea of something to be achieved. Someone's enough and someone's not enough. So if it doesn't work for you, maybe some of these other strategies will help.
I texted you a whole bunch of analogies and metaphors. I was like full of analogies and metaphors that day. So it's like a garden show, this conference. You get to show off your blooms this season. And then I also lovingly called you out on your tall poppy syndrome. And we've talked about that before in earlier episodes. But really, giving yourself permission to shine and bloom as the flower that you already are. Only then, when you give yourself permission to do so, can the people that really need you, that who you can help, that's the only way that they can see you.
I love that idea. I've often said when people are making decisions about shifting or changing, what will the world miss out on if you don't do it? And that's actually what just came to mind when you said that. What will people miss out on if you don't share your perspective? And maybe it isn't going to be the perspective that resonates with everyone. But again, somebody will miss out if you don't share it. You also told me that your talk and your approach is another door about physician wellness and mindfulness and compassion. Do you want to share what you meant by that?
Yeah, yet another metaphor analogy. This was lovingly shared with me by Kristen Neff, the co-founder of the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion and like pioneer researcher in self-compassion. So we were talking about all of the other experts and teachers of compassion in the world today, that we don't have to put others down to make us feel better about ourselves or our approach or our teaching. We can come from an abundance mindset and invite others into the same room, even if they're coming through different doors, and the different doors represent other teachers or another expert, that we all can end up in this same limitless and boundless room in the situation of compassion. And in your conference, it was about being in the same room on physician well-being.
And this concept of abundance, I think, is very powerful. So many of us come from scarcity and the competition mindset. And for those of us who went into medicine, that was our training. And so to step out of it and to reconnect with this idea of abundance and everyone bringing valuable insights on, as you said, a vast topic, that's super powerful. So I love this idea of you do you and let others do them. You also told me that this is what you do, and that putting yourself out there in this way helps you be the catalyst for others. And I found those very helpful thoughts.
Yeah, it enables others to see what's possible when you show up in your authentic self, even if there is a little bit of trepidation. Yeah. So another tip is to connect with your why. So getting back to what your core values are, like, why are you doing this work? And asking yourself that before an opportunity that might bring on some anxiety or imposter syndrome is also another way to move through this uncomfortable situation.
Love that. And imposter syndrome can also be a transition issue. And when we make a transition, or when we step into doing something that we haven't done before, or maybe it's something we have done before, but we haven't done it in a while, or we're doing it in a different way or a different setting, or with a very different audience, it can take time to settle in. And so reminding yourself that when you are transitioning, being uncomfortable is part of it. When it's unfamiliar, it doesn't mean it's a problem. And being uncomfortable doesn't mean it's a problem. It means it's unfamiliar. And so in medicine, we were very much trained that when we feel uncomfortable, that something's wrong and that we need to find a solution. And so getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and realizing that discomfort's literally part of every transition in life. And whether it's even a transition, as I was making here, from a family vacation back right to a conference. And I really hadn't thought about it in that way. I just thought it was very convenient. And in fact, we had vacationed in Utah, which was fabulous, in a place I would never have gone because this conference was there. And when I had asked my young adult children, they were all interested in going there. So we all went because of this conference. But then I found myself in this edgy moment of them all leaving, going back to their life. And here I was about to switch right back into something very different. And so remembering that a lot of times we just feel like an imposter when we feel unsettled and we are transitioning. Some of the other wisdom you shared that day ties into the transitioning and the reflections on seasons.
Yes, I texted, "This is not your first season of blooming. It's a different season." And in reflecting upon that now, the conference with the audience and other speakers that you didn't know as well were like an entirely different garden, entirely different neighboring plants, entirely different environment, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that you can't grow and bloom there as well.
And that it's perfectly natural to be uncomfortable. The other thing I do want to share is once I got there, it was fine. So much of the imposter syndrome is your anticipatory anxiety about showing up somewhere where you don't really know anybody. And it seemed like it was a good fit, and it seemed like it was aligned and authentic for me. And yet, because I had never met these people in person, I think you always have that little bit of edge of anxiety. I love the season analogy too, because it's temporary and we get to change and grow and evolve and be someone different and see things in from a creative lens. And so for me, when I think about it as a season, it opens up possibility and creativity.
So in teaching mindfulness, talking about discomfort and transitions, when we're facilitating mindfulness practices that might be uncomfortable, we often preempt the practice with the circles of safety. So I think this is a good opportunity to bring that in. So in the middle of this circles of safety is where our brain loves for us to be, and that's our zone of safety. It's what we are used to, it's routine, it is uber comfortable to be in that zone of safety. And then around that circle is the zone of challenge. That's where we grow. And in order to do so, there's usually a little bit of stress and even sometimes some fear that puts us in our zone of challenge. And so this we know is a sweet spot for learning and for growth. And so I feel like you were in your zone of challenge, at least leading up to the conference. And then around that zone of challenge then is the zone of overwhelm. That's where our mindfulness practice can tell us where we are. So if we're in our zone of overwhelm, we can recognize that because we've practiced mindfulness. When it arises for us, and oftentimes it can be in a circumstance with shame or a very triggering situation with this hyperactivation of the fight or flight response, or even a trauma response. This is our body's way of letting us know to get back into our zone of safety. And oftentimes bringing ourselves back into our zone of safety from a zone of overwhelm is the most self-compassionate thing for us to do, and that we should heed our own body's advice and honor that.
And for me, what was self-compassionate was to reach out to you. I know that I do really well with connection and processing with another human. And I I often talk in coaching about a want match, and you are my want match for processing when I'm pushing myself or stretching or growing or just feeling a little uncertain or off kilter. And I think it's a concept that we haven't talked much about here, but I just want to bring up because I have a lovely husband. He's not my want match for processing this. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't understand. And if he thinks I'm anxious, he thinks he needs to fix it. And he's just not my want match. My children are not my want match. And there are many people out there who wouldn't be a want match. And so noticing who's your want match for things ahead of time and sort of knowing who they are, I think I'm your want match for this topic as well. Mm-hmm. And when you find a person who's a want match, it's a great opportunity. And so we often talk about, I have want matches for walking and exercising and want matches for traveling. And for many of us, we think that they have to all be the same person. And so I love the abundance, as we were talking about, of want matches for help and support. And actually also in the podcast that came up today, we were talking about having a team of support and how we all need a team of different approaches, and that a therapist might be your want match for something, and your coach might be a want match for something, and your mentor might be a want match for something, and your loved ones might be a want match for something. And so I think, imposter syndrome is this thing that we really struggle with. And so noticing perhaps you have different want matches for different components of it, or maybe there's a person who can always help you find your groundedness and the thoughts that help you move beyond it. One last tidbit that I wanted to share around imposter syndrome is that most people think that confidence is the answer. And if I'm just confident, I won't have it. And so many people who come to me for coaching, what they want to feel is confident. And I find confidence incredibly challenging for most people. So sometimes I change the confidence to calm and grounded because many people feel that that's much more accessible. And so I encourage you to think about, well, what does confidence feel like? And are any of those things more accessible? And the other concept about confidence that I think is critical to share here is that most of us think we're supposed to be confident before. So we're supposed to be confident the night before we go give the talk in a new environment. Or in this case, they had this beautiful thing in the conference, which I now think is a fantastic way to teach. And I would absolutely do it again, but I had never done it before. They had these round tables and you had a topic that you talked about and you shared that was a very interactive space for 30 minutes. And then a new group would come every 30 minutes and they would go to a different table. And it was just a way of sharing information that I had never experienced before. I will say it was fantastic, but I didn't have the confidence before. You have the confidence after you do it and you say, wow, I'm really good at facilitating in that environment. Or, when people come up to you after your talk and say, I found that so helpful and such an interesting perspective. Now, all of a sudden you feel confident. So the way that I like to think about confidence, and I'll actually say I first heard this from Katrina Ubell, who's also a physician coach who does weight loss coaching. And she talked about how it takes commitment first. And so a commitment would be signing up, for example, to give the talk, or deciding that you are a person who wants to go out and share your message. And then it takes courage. So courage to do it. You do need to practice, be capable, develop that experience and skills and knowledge and skill set so that you are a capable speaker. But the confidence doesn't come until after you give the talk. And so many of us think that if we don't have confidence at the beginning, something's wrong, if we are an imposter. And so actually, really, I love this concept because commitment for me, that's okay with me. Courage, I can do that. Feeling capable, all of those are steps along the way that you can move through. But the confidence doesn't come until the end. And it's such a liberating way of thinking about confidence. I think for ourselves, especially for teenagers and children who think that they're supposed to be confident before they go out on the soccer field for the first time. And I think there's so many ways in those of you who do graduate medical education, this is a really valuable concept for residents and fellows and people starting out even as new attendings.
As always, we like to close our podcasts with some reflection questions. So, dear listener, is there an event or an opportunity coming up that you would like to apply for where imposter syndrome is coming up for you?
Noticing your thoughts, emotions, and body sensations in this moment about that. What are they?
How are your life experiences already going to be helpful for you to start believing that you can do this, that you already have valuable wisdom to offer?
Who can you reach out to get support? And whose belief in you can you borrow as a scaffold of support as you bloom and shine? We hope that you will choose to work with us in some way to grow a mindfulness practice and or get coached. And we hope that we inspired you to believe that you can move beyond imposter syndrome if you approach it with awareness, tools, strategies, and most of all, reaching out for help and support. We all need reminders, support, and coaching along our journeys and seasons of life. You can join us for one-on-one coaching or a retreat where you can learn about mindfulness. The Connect to Nature retreat for 2024 is open for registration. Imposter syndrome is a very common topic of coaching at the Sagrada Nourish and Transform retreats for women physicians. And just realizing that imposter syndrome is not a problem. It's a common habit that we all can move through and beyond.
Thanks so much for listening. Please stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for our mindful moment offering.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or up-level your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
Welcome to today's mindful moment. Today's mindful moment is going to be a moment to ground into your strengths, to ground into what you are good at and what feels good. So taking a moment to find your sit bones and connect them into the earth. And if you're standing, the soles of the feet, connect them into the earth. And notice for a few moments how steady and safe and strong you feel. Often when we are feeling anxious or like an imposter, we don't feel steady and strong and grounded and tree-like. And so taking a moment to notice your sit bones or your feet as the root of a tree, standing tall, engaging your kneecaps if you're standing, engaging your tummy muscles if you're not, tilting your pelvic bowl forward and align your spine tall and gracefully towards the sky. Connecting with a sense of safety, connecting with a sense of strength, inner strength, and connecting with a deep sense of calm and peace. And for today's mindful moment, bring a hand to heart and another hand to the top. Connecting into who you are, connecting into the strength of that heart space, your heart there taking care of you every moment of every day, beating consistent, strong, and nurturing. Come back to the breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. 3 more long, deep inhales and exhales. Notice the breath pour in through your nose, calm, even, and steady. And out through your mouth, calm, even, and steady. One more in this way. Even the inhale and the exhale, inviting a sense of calm, peace, focus. And begin to reflect on your life. Reflect on all the incredible accomplishments, objective things that you have done. Graduating from kindergarten, middle school, high school, college, and for many of you, medical school, or nursing school, or PA school, or law school. Reflecting on those actual, undeniable accomplishments, incredible accomplishments. For those of you that have done a residency or a fellowship, count the number of years you spent training to do what you do. And taking a moment to allow those accomplishments and achievements in, appreciating yourself, and objectively reminding yourself, how many patients have you cared for? How many patients have you helped? How many children have you raised? How many people do you love? If you've written a book or have a podcast or something like that, how many people have you reached that way? If you haven't, no worries, no room for compare and despair. Remembering what you're good at. What is something about you that you would never wish to change? Is it your sense of humor, your math ability, your love of reading, your laughter? What is it about you that you would never wish to change? What is your unique lens? What do you bring to things that is you, different, special? Perhaps your background, perhaps your heritage or your culture, perhaps where you grew up, perhaps something different about you. Not better or worse, but just different. We all have a different lens to bring to situations. We open a different door, we bring different insight and different perspective. What's your perspective? Once again, not better or worse than anyone else's, but what do you bring to your work, to your patients, to talks you give? What's your specialty? And by specialty, I mean not your medical specialty, but what you're really good at. Are you really good at crossword puzzles or untangling knots? Or do you make a mean, specific, fantastic dinner? Are you really good at calming babies? Are you amazing at putting children to sleep? What is your specialty? What is the thing that you love? Are you amazing at caring for dogs and animals? Or is there a specific surgery that you're really good at, or a specific diagnosis that is your specialty that you love? Connecting with who you are and what you love, and connecting with all the ways in which you bring that into the world, changing lives. Coming back to the breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Reflecting on these ideas slowly, patiently, even after this meditation is complete. What do you bring to all of the different situations in your life, roles in your life? Who are you? Stepping out of the idea of who are you not? Where might you fall short? What if you are so many things? What if you don't fall short? What if you're not inadequate? What if you are not enough? What would it feel like to be adequate? To bring important things, to share your perspective and your story and your purpose and your mission. Taking in a breath and letting that in, even if it's hard, even if it feels a little edgy, breathing in, pour the breath throughout your whole body, especially your belly and your lower belly, where we tend to carry the doubt. Into the root chakra, the sacral chakra, the solar plexus, the parts of you that define you. Breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Those areas of your body also define trust. Notice your root chakra, your sit bones connecting into the seat below. Breathing in and out. Notice how you feel. And allow yourself 3 more long, deep, smooth inhales. While you notice your hand to heart, hand to hand, noticing that safety and connection to yourself. Notice your chest rise and fall with the inhale and the exhale. Notice the skin to skin. Let yourself feel steady, strong, like a tree, with a thick trunk supporting you, deep roots, all the experiences, training, learning that you've had, all there, coming along with you for whatever you do. Taking a moment to connect to your inner strength, your sense of safety, your trust in self, and the accomplishments, all the things in your life that you have done, indisputably. The diplomas you have, the fellowships you pursued, the training you have, the places you've lived, the sports you've played. Connecting to those old versions of you and bringing them back into you noticeably. Notice them, honor them, and notice how you feel now compared to when we began. Send the breath into any body part that feels a little nervous, edgy, uncomfortable with noticing your accomplishments, allowing them in, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And take a couple moments here to enjoy. When you're ready, you can lower your hands into your lap, open your eyes, let the light come in gently, and notice perhaps how you feel in this moment and allow yourself to enjoy it. Thank you all so much for practicing with me today. We'll see you next week.